Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ventures. I'm excited about today's episode with Saul Cates and Bill Murphy. We take some time at the beginning to walk through the investment banking and private equity world, do a little educating for those that aren't familiar with that world. And then we talk a little bit about Bill's company, Cresting Wave, and specifically the way that they help technology leaders in cybersecurity and cloud. And we spend some time talking about the different stages of technology leadership, how it changes from right when you start a company to when you get to about 8 or 10 technology people to growing all the way up to 100 people and more. And there are some very important stages along that journey as a technology leader that we discuss in this episode. So if you're watching, you can listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can just search for Ventures. And if you're listening, you can also watch this episode by visiting wclittle.com, and there you'll see more extensive show notes to the things that we talk about in today's episode. So with that, please enjoy this conversation with Saul Cates and Bill Murphy. All right, Bill, Saul, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Hey, thanks, Will.
So Saul, would you mind teeing us up? Good to have you back. Lots of things to talk about. Excited to dive in here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so this is my fourth one with you. So I was just saying, I feel like I'm hogging the ball, but hopefully people are enjoying some of the things we're doing. I've been sort of recently, reconnecting with people in my network, and with lots of new sort of ventures and innovations happening out there, and understanding where sort of technical leadership is going. I decided to reach out to some old friends, and I reached out to Cresting Wave, which is a company I'd been using in a past life as a strategic partner for when we were selling some of our early technologies to potential new companies. And it was interesting to sort of reopen those conversations, and that's where I stumbled into Bill. So Bill and I are sort of new acquaintances, and I'll let him sort of introduce himself and his background, but definitely there was a connection there through friend of a friend. But it was it's a world I understood. We're really trying to take advanced or properly tuned technologies to the market so they can really create value for all parties, right? The founder, the inventors, but also the early buyers that are getting that either edge or jumping the chasm for the good reason, right? So anyways, with that, Bill, glad to sort of meet you, and then sort of let you introduce yourself a bit, and then we'll start the combo from there.
Sure. It's been great, initial few conversations we've had as well. Yeah, I can give a little bit of background about myself. I was one of the founding team at CapitalIQ for 11 years, from 1999 to 2011. CapitalIQ was one of the first SaaS businesses. Back when we didn't even call it SaaS, we called it application service provider.
ASPs.
ASPs, right?
Yeah.
I wish we had the multiples that they have now. It would have been a more lucrative endeavor. But it was a great run, and we built the first version with a small team, and then kind of grew the team and grew the company, and had a great run there. After CapitalIQ, I went to become the CTO of Blackstone. Probably everybody's heard of Blackstone, largest private equity firm in the world, and ran technology there. Did some led strategic investing in small tech companies too, and developed some different muscles than at CapitalIQ. It was fun being on. Instead of being on the selling side, being on the buying side of technology, and seeing a breadth of technology that was pretty vast. And Blackstone owned or still owns hundreds of companies and invests in them. So it gave me a chance to see patterns across this very, very large playing field that I was lucky enough to be placed on and see. So it was a great experience, 8.5 years there. Left at the end of 99. I was transitioning out, and a global pandemic hit, which was definitely not in the plan. But it's been a fun time to reconnect with my family, and then sort of figure out what I wanted to do and what I wanted to build going forward. And what I've now done is we've relaunched Cresting Wave, where you had some great experiences with my partner Steve in the past, and really the concept is that the life of the CTO is harder than it's ever been, and you're always sort of looking to stay ahead of the game, and falling behind with new technologies never feels good, because you want to be using your technology muscles, because that's why we got into this, to solve hard problems and do cool stuff that no one has even dreamed up before. But at a lot of the times, the enterprise CIOs become sort of they're politicians, they're running an enterprise, they're just trying to keep it run. Like, there's a lot of pressures. And often what goes by the wayside is that discovery of new things. So Cresting Wave was actually helping me with that at Blackstone by bringing me new technologies, a couple of them a month. And it was always a good way to stay somewhat ahead of the trends. But then I sort of supplemented that with go to a venture briefing here and a podcast there, and you're just sort of reading and trying to stay up on all these thousands of new companies that are getting funded and could potentially solve some cool problems. So what we're doing at Cresting Wave is trying to curate that noise for you by understanding the technology needs of individuals, CIOs, CTOs, CISOs, other folks in leadership positions in technology. And if we understand the environment, we can match and say, hey, you're a consumer website. You probably are worried about fraud prevention. We've identified a new fraud prevention technology. Let us bring it to you. Oh, wow, you're really starting with DevOps, or you're starting with Kubernetes, and you want to do it in the right way, but you really don't have the experience. What are the right products that we can help you identify so that you can get up that learning curve much faster? So it's been fun. We've got 20 clients in our portfolio, and we're curating a network of hundreds of technology leaders, and we're trying to grow both sides of that in a way that is sustainable, so that we continue to bring a lot of value to both sides as advisors to the tech community, but also as advisors to our clients who are trying to get their product to be heard in the midst of all of this noise. So thank you for having me, and excited to dig deeper on some of these things.
Yeah, so I'm curious to go way back to the 90s. Late 90s. A lot of entrepreneurs listening in. What was the story of getting CapitalIQ up? What was the process of getting that venture up and going?
Yeah, sure. It was. It's funny because I joke. My wife, who was my girlfriend then, I got her to move to New York to come with me on the CapitalIQ ride. And I was always like, it was 99. Everyone thought, pets.com, you were going to be rich in 10 minutes.
Right.
So I was like, we'll just be there for 2 years, and then we'll cash out and we'll go do something else. And obviously 25 years later, we're still in New York and so on. So it's funny. Essentially, I joined the two founders, were former investment bankers who were seeking a better way to do investment banking. And I was the third wheel, or the third leg of the stool, in terms of building the how. And as much in life, it's pretty funny. We got introduced through a friend of a friend who actually wound up joining us as a key member of our executive team too, a year later or 2 years later. But your life changes on such small moments. So I got introduced to these guys, and we started talking about, okay, how could you change investment banking with technology? And I didn't know what investment banking was, but they did, deep, and they understood all the problems and such, which I think is a really interesting combination when you're starting companies, right? Is you want to have the expertise, and then you want to have beginner's mind, so that you can put them together. Right. If everybody's an expert in the use case, you often just do the same thing, maybe slightly better than they've always done. So I got to be the beginner's mind, asking all the dumb questions and saying, what do you do? Why do you do it that way? Does that really make sense? Is that just because you didn't have the data in order to look at the company a certain way? Right. And there was tons of these question answer design sessions, and having two experts with me, and then we actually added to that team with many other experts in the industry. Our whole sales team, software sales team, came from banking to a great degree. So so that expertise flowed directly into product, and I think we just had a really good kind of product feedback loop. But we weren't building something for one bank; we were building it for everybody, and we always kept that in mind, and sort of didn't overly specialize to any given client.
So, from an education standpoint, speaking of asking the silly questions or potentially the questions from a beginner's mindset, what is investment banking? Why should people care about it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the initial persona that we were targeting at CapitalIQ was people who helped sell companies or raise capital for companies. So those are your sell side investment bankers who if you need to raise money for a transaction, you can go to them and say, "Can you help me?" And they'll basically help you with the messaging. They'll help you target who you should raise money from for your given venture, and then put the deal together and facilitate that deal going forward. So as a banker, what you're constantly doing is trying to find new opportunities. So you need to find the companies and then bring them ideas and say, "Hey, Coca-Cola, we can help you raise debt at an attractive rate, at an attractive amount, because you should build new bottling plants." Obviously, it's a silly example, but even down to the smallest companies, people need capital and need ideas to grow their businesses, and that's what the investment bankers are doing. It's an oversimplification, but that's essentially the role. And then we eventually grew the platform so we could service people who were investing in the public markets, private markets, people on the buy side who are buying the assets, not the ones that are facilitating the sale of the assets. So we continued to grow the platform, but it really started as an investment banking productivity tool using data in order to make them better at that job.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of the founders that we work with just have no idea about the private equity investment banking world. And so this is probably our first episode even introducing these concepts. So maybe if you're willing to even just take a few more moments to just explain what is private equity, at what point should founders be thinking about taking calls? Because I remember when I first started my first few companies, I had all these private equity investment banker people reach out, and I didn't really know why, or I didn't have the context. They just wanted to meet with me. It took some of them, and it just seemed like my companies were way too early. But how should founders be thinking about this world?
Right. So private equity is sometimes the vocabulary gets difficult. So you can think about private equity as a piece of private capital overall. And there's all different types of private capital investors that you probably have heard the term. So you got venture capital, which are people who are investing in early stage companies, probably the primary focus of the people who are listening to this. Then there's private equity, where they're buying later stage companies as an alternative to going public or otherwise. And then there's real estate as another asset class. There's people in the private credit markets who are lending to companies and other types of debt instruments and so on. And there's a couple of other vagaries of that. But the essential benefit of private capital over other forms of capital is that the investors are more involved in the asset. They can help. And a good way to explain this is really how we funded CapitalIQ. We raised money from 7 banks as private investors. So we put together a couple rounds, and having our biggest investors also be potential customers was a really good strategy, because we learned from them. We built tools that they wanted to use, and then we also got good contracts from them. And having an investor have another reason why they might want to work with you, to raise the value of their stake, it's always better than just having a customer. So I'd say to answer so that's a little bit about the industry. To answer your question about when, it really depends upon the type of capital needs that your business has, right? There are some businesses, if you're a services business and you don't have a lot of fixed cost, sometimes you can bootstrap forever without raising capital, right? If it's a huge build that's going to take many years to come up, and a large team to come up with a product. Like I'd say the biotech space is probably the area where you need the most capital, right? They're trying to invent these drugs. They're raising hundreds of millions of dollars in capital in order to get them all the way from the beginning through to being approved before they have $1 of revenue. So that's on one end of the spectrum where you need to raise a ton of money. Small services company, and you grow gradually is on the other end of the spectrum where you almost don't have to raise anything. So you have to look at what your business is and also what your risk appetite is. Some people will mortgage their home in order to maintain all the ownership themselves. Other people like to share the risk with investors, and obviously everybody has a different financial situation individually, so they can go longer. I would say that the key is picking investors that can help you in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
So it's not just about money. Money is very available right now if you have a good story. So sometimes it's better to take less capital at a lower valuation if the investor can really be part of your journey and accelerate your growth.
So important. So important.
Yeah. I was going to just ask a follow-on question to that real quick. So, you gave the perspective from the founder or younger entrepreneur and their journey of their company, I guess. What about like the industrialists out there? Like, I represent a bunch of different types of companies that I work with or are part of my network. And, I see similarities of needs, right? Where there's a need to disrupt how we work with capital and how we work with incentive and retention plans and stuff in the larger corporations. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, how does industry or workers within industry try to find ways to help in this sort of same regard? I think there's a lot of ways to bring expertise out to that sort of market. And how do you do that?
Yeah, well, I mean,
in a healthy way, I guess.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Blackstone's buying mostly mature companies later on, and the big benefit of working with larger private equity firms is essentially the same as a small VC. Like, find somebody that can help you, and then also private equity tends to be more patient than the public markets too. So if you're a big company and you're trying to figure out, I got to go through a major transition, I have to. I'm a data center business and I need to get to the cloud, and I know it's going to take me 5 years, and my financials are going to look a little weird during that 5-year time frame. It's going to be difficult to understand. Often the best case is find an investor who wants to go on that journey with you and knows that once you've crossed that chasm, you've made all the investments, there's a big financial payoff at the end, and private equity is very good at seeing that and envisioning the future, and then aligning incentives with the management team and with the employees. But there's people. It's across the spectrum. There's good and bad structures in all the different types of financing. But I do think that the creativity of how companies is funded is probably at an all-time high. People are searching all different ways to, and there's no necessarily right answer. But it's good to consider all of the options and not believe that you have to take one path. I've often found that people feel like, oh, well, I have to do a seed round, and then I have to do an A that looks like this, and then I have to do a B that looks like that. And I do some individual investing in seed companies, and I'm constantly trying to question the CEOs to be like, well, why do you have to do the round?
Right.
Can't
you self-fund?
Maybe you should self-fund, or at least consider it, or at least have a plan in case the round is not there for whatever reason. And, putting yourself through the thought process of all the possible outcomes is, it's a good exercise for every founder to go through, and creates independence, I guess.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I see that maybe it's a coaching moment for those younger founders or younger entrepreneurs is, if you can figure out how to get your first customer as quickly as possible and start making yourself a working company, and all that, you get that engine started, the better, right? First customer or first loss is great.
Yes, totally.
Because it teaches you so much so quick.
I think that's like the fact that you just said first loss is really great. The number one thing that I look for in founders that I want to invest in is people who are willing to listen and like have the guts to put themselves out there and like get rejected, right? Because how many of your friends are always like, I got the greatest idea and I'm working on it and eventually I'll get it to market. And you're like, you're scared, right?
Yeah.
Either you're not capable of it or you're scared of trying because maybe somebody's going to tell you that your idea is not good. So every entrepreneur has a lot of guts. But the quicker you can get that cycle going, where you get in front of customer, learn, get in front of customer, learn, get in front of customer, learn, but make sure that you have the apparatus both personally and within your team to take that feedback in the right way. Because I've also seen people who are actually, there's two ends of the spectrum. There's the people who listen to everything down to the letter and are constantly pivoting. And they're like, I met somebody today and I pivoted, and then I pivoted next week and I pivoted the week after that. I think you need to have a North Star. At CapitalIQ, it was like, we're building great productivity solutions for the financial services industry. And we're going to go, you get whatever data and build whatever technology to. Now, we pivoted lots inside of that vision, but we felt like we had that North Star. Now, on the flip side, there's also the people who are, they bang their head against the wall. They can't get their first customer. They can't get their first customer. They can't get but they just keep trying to sell the same thing, expecting that, just one more conversation and everything is going to change. So you can make mistakes on both sides. You just have to kind of 2 ears and 1 mouth, and try to listen well to the feedback.
Yeah.
So Saul, for those that, haven't catched the last couple of episodes, would you mind maybe just doing a quick background of you and then maybe share how your journey interacts with some of the themes and topics that we've been discussing here?
Yeah, so I'll keep it short. So I sold a lot into enterprises and governments and big problem areas, right? So I'd say from my perspective, I've seen founders, I've seen startups, I've been part of an acquisition, I've done due diligence, I've been in selling mode, I've been a marketer, I've been, I tried all the hats I could find, and that it was fun, right? Because when you're in startup land, you can do all that, and when you're doing research and development, and I was left alone for probably way too long, about 3 or 4 years, and was told, go play with your toys and look to 18 months in the future for a while. That was awesome, and I played with a lot of friends that were doing the exact same thing with me. So I have sort of weird, I don't know, skill or perspective where I can look to the future, and it's just a series of decisions and steps and potential, consequences that'll happen. But it's not hard to predict what will happen next. And so I think getting back to the sort of your question and how it ties together, looking at industry, period, like if it's a large conglomerate, if it's a particular market, if it's a vertical, or if it's a startup with an idea, understanding the problem and then what validating that problem is important to solve is so damn critical, right? How many technologies have been hunting down for their use case, right? You said it earlier, you can never get customer one because they don't understand what the customer needs, right? Or the widget they have is the wrong time, wrong thing, right? There's so many examples of that. I've done my startup due diligence and I've done my startup failures where we've gone through and missed something. And the thing that was always a big miss was customer understanding, right? Getting customer validation soon. And you said earlier, like the loss statement. Yeah, fail fast. Fail your idea. Figure out why it ain't happening. So I think my journey to it is I've been on both sides of the fence quite a few times, and I've learned from a lot of people, and I try to find other people that can say these words, not just me. But I think Bill understands, and probably you do too, well, that there's a bridge into experts of understanding customers, and that's where I met Cresting Wave some years ago. We had a technology at a company I was working with, and we were trying to hunt down our first couple customers, and we sort of knew our widget, we sort of knew our story, and we could tell that story, but it turned out that there wasn't a lot of synergies with the buyers at the time outside of some high-end hedge funds and people like that are on the super spectrum of extreme, right? That's not your normal market, right? It's like there's a handful of those that are going to do that, and you get installed with them. that was a great learning experience because there's also this whole world of just a couple customers. I didn't know that, right? There are worlds like that that are huge. So, it's interesting. I have a more deeper appreciation now than I did before, and I don't know, Bill, if you wanted to comment on it. There is sort of like the general market. There's those little tiny supermarkets, right, that are like just so niche, but wow, you can retire on that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because there is a spectrum out there that's just so extreme sometimes.
Sure, and I think like been interesting. I've been thinking a lot about this because the whole broad versus specialized, and I do think that that often people get like a couple of big customers or like really engaged people can throw these companies off the scent too, right? Where you're making an assumption that there's a couple of hedge funds that buy so much data and they'll spend anything to try to find new ideas, right? And I've met tons of these companies that are like, oh, we have new data and we've projected the market at $400 million. And you're like, why? And they're like, well, they took what those two hedge funds would spend and then they multiplied it by the number of hedge funds. And and they were like, look at all this market. So I guess making sure that you're not attacking a market with rose-colored glasses is the number one learning.
And happy ears.
Right, yeah. People, all they want to do is hear that it's great. The number of times when folks have come out like, oh, they said they love my product, and it's like they just don't want to insult you to your face. Like they clearly are not going to do anything. Like, I mean, it was like, but you're in the same meeting and you're hearing it one way and they're hearing it the way that they want to hear it. So like, just like super honesty with yourself as a founder, and then I'd say the curiosity to be searching for opportunities deeply. I do think that like the world is like bordering on like over optimization, where everyone's like, if I don't get an immediate yes, move on. Don't get an immediate yes, move on. And like there's this belief in like the law of large numbers, but I actually don't think the numbers are as large as people. Maybe if you're like advertising on Facebook, the numbers are large because there's billions of people. But for the people who are selling to CTOs, there aren't that many. There are a decent number, but like it's not crazy. So instead of just saying, Bill said no, let's go to Joe. Joe said no, let's go to Mary, and then expecting a different outcome, it's like a lot of questioning of why is the no. And that's what we're trying to bring, is an intimacy with our community that can enable like those real honest dialogues instead of the glad handing or just sort of like surface level conversations that often kind of can give you the wrong signal. And we go on every meeting with our clients and sort of facilitate that deepening of that dialogue. We're not just like setting up a meeting and leaving. We're right there with you, co-piloting your sales process as an innovative young company. And I think our tech leaders who are in our community appreciate that as well, because they know they've got an advocate for their needs. And we're only going to bring them something that we think meets their needs based upon our knowledge. Right? We're not going to bring an AWS spend optimization to somebody who uses GCP, right? But that happens all the time. I used to get approached by these like business broker lead gen type of people at Blackstone, and everyone thinks Blackstone's this huge company. It's really it's big in terms of impact, small in terms of number of people, and we didn't have the legacy debt. I remember I probably had 10 people come in try to sell me mainframe conversion technology, and mainframes
doesn't exist here,
right? So like that wastes time for technology leaders. It creates exhaustion from new things. So we're trying to prevent that and then create deeper dialogue so that everybody kind of gets a better understanding. And oftentimes, if you really if you double click a few times in these conversations, you can get to the heart of a problem that either the solution can address or the next rev of the solution can address.
Right.
But it really comes down to like good questioning and really understanding the customer as you're talking to them, or at least seeking to understand. And it's fine to ask questions once you've showed them the basics of what you're trying to solve, and then getting their reaction to your product, and then diving in on where the gaps could be that your product could fill.
So let's talk about the stages of technology leadership, right? As you grow a company and you're a technology leader, what is it like at the very beginning? You know, for those who are at that precipice of like, all right, now's the time to take action. I'm a tech person, maybe I'm, code at a large company or something. I'm ready to take that next step and get going on a venture. And then what are those stages as the company grows, just so the early technology leaders can be at least aware of how of what that process is like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm watching in our portfolio, Cresting Wave, and my personal investment portfolio, I have people who are like moving along this spectrum, and it's been great to watch. And luckily at CapitalIQ, we grew, I guess, slow enough for me to hang on, but fast enough for it to be a wild ride. A lot of times, the hyper growth companies outgrow the founder CTO really fast, and they have to hire professional management or whatever, quote unquote. And then other times it's just too slow to be that exciting, and the founders leave because they want to go on to their next thing. So I count myself very lucky that I had an 11-year process where we started as like 3 people, and when I ended we had 5,000 and my team was like 500. So I got to see a lot of the different paths, of the different types of leadership that I needed to exhibit during that time. So, we started, you're doing whatever it takes. You're coding, you are testing, you are fixing the data, you are picking all your vendors, and you are, you're taking the beeper, I'm dating myself, right? It's like you have the on-call beeper and getting woken up at 4 a.m. When necessary. So you're doing everything. And then the biggest shift I find is when you get to like 8 to 10 technologists in your company, the first time CTO gets really uncomfortable, because to them it feels like, oh my God, we are a huge team right now, because they're used to like literally writing every line of code, or at least reviewing every line of code. And at that point, you've got to start putting scaffolding in place to make sure that you can oversee it without having to be in every line of code. And a lot of people do get stuck where they're just like, they're never able to put that scaffolding in place to create a QA effort that's not dependent on you, create a vendor, infrastructure.
Cloning yourself and detaching yourself, right?
Right. But putting the process in place to give yourself the ability to oversee it with a time commitment that is realistic inside of, I'd say that's pretty much the skill, right? Is you want to fill up your plate and then figure out how to put process in such that it frees up parts of your plate so you can add more to your plate, then do the same thing with that. And it's just this like consistent optimization of the CTO role, that so you can handle more while, as the company is growing. Usually that just means like more functionality, bigger teams, more partnerships, more vendor products, heightened risks that you have to take into account, and so on.
So we have a lot of portfolio companies at Proto that are right at that stage where the CTO is hanging on, loving to code, loving to wear all the hats, having a very difficult time delegating and setting up exactly the things that you're describing. So maybe to zoom in on that phase or that transition just for a moment, where even specifically with Cresting Wave, is this a stage where Cresting Wave can help, or what are the different aspects? If you talked about QA.
Yeah, I mean, typically what Cresting Wave is doing is like, I'm actually providing upfront product feedback and other, any type of feedback advice that our companies need, we're willing to give them. We're specializing in sort of taking their product and getting it to the customer so that they can either get the customers or getting the feedback. So we're like on the go-to-market side, but we're also happy to opine on and wherever I can help them
Sure.
with those types of lessons too. I mean, I would say that the number one thing is that like people hold themselves back because they're scared of letting go. And it doesn't mean you're selling out. It doesn't mean everything's going to fall apart tomorrow. And, also they think about themselves as like not wanting to ever be managed, because the founding CTO person is like, they became an entrepreneur because they wanted to have freedom, right? But the 10th person you hire is not the entrepreneur.
Right.
And their person is willing to take a risk to go to a 10-person company, but like they're probably not the person that would start a company, or they might not be, right? So not projecting your wants onto every part of your team is also another thing to keep in mind as you're trying to grow that effort, because like people want to be led. Yeah. They want to be told, they want to be put in a position to succeed with solid processes that are like scaffolding the company so that they can succeed without having to kill themselves. So they want to be led, so you can micromanage them more than you probably want to be micromanaged as the founder. Yeah. And then, but on the flip side, they're not going to care as much as you. So you have to like realize that, that's your burden as one of the founders, is like you care more than everybody else. So just shaking your head and getting mad because people aren't willing to give what you're willing to give is not a strategy. Like you need to understand, how you can put the things in place to make it easier for them to deliver to the level that you want without necessarily ruining their personal life or ruining the other priorities in their life that might not align to your own.
I think that's where culture can come in and help a lot too, where that creating a good culture, so that understanding of difference and diversity is so damn important. Because I've said it before in other contexts, but diversity, not just for the reasons you'd put down in an HR framework, but really for what I found to be the best formula for problem solving is tons of people with so many different diverse backgrounds and expertise and everything. You get them all to look at the same problem, and one person is going to say something totally different, and it's usually the aha thing, right?
Yeah, and to speak to that, it's even like personality types being different, right?
Exactly.
So
whatever.
Yeah, my leadership team, a bunch of which came with me from CapitalIQ to Blackstone, we actually did a number of these like Myers-Briggs, and I forget the other one, but that I'm
DISC,
about to reference.
Probably. It's by DISC or Enneagram.
Right, it wasn't the Enneagram, but it was like a red, green, blue is what they put you in 3 colors, and essentially the red is quick decision maker, the green is rely on the data and double check the data before you make a decision, and then blue is like how does that decision affect the people. And I'm massively simplifying here. And after we put ourselves into those buckets with the exercise, we realized that the management team that we created was like this perfectly balanced set of things. And I was like, wow, that's cool. I wish we had known that, because I might have actually looked for the green person that I needed, or the blue person, or the red people that I needed.
You would have been informed, right?
I would have been informed in terms of, but we sort of, through trial and error of many, many years of flipping people out and finding it, we basically come to this well-balanced team. And, the woman who was like the bluest of everybody was like always, how's this going to affect the people? How do we keep the people motivated? How do we do all of that? And then like the person who was the green side was always like, yeah, but the data has to show that, and I was like very extreme on the red side as the leader, who was like constantly pushing. And then they actually, they measure you on how are you during a crisis versus how are you during calm, right? But anyway, it was a really interesting exercise. And I think we should, when you're building a team, you shouldn't just say, do I have diversity of, experience, or diversity of gender, or diversity of race, or diversity of background. You should also be like diversity of how we approach problems, and diversity of types of leadership. And then, put them together in a structure. Like you wouldn't want the red hot decision maker person to be like in charge of your long-term data analytics maybe or something, because like
they'll be bored.
Right. So you got to like put them in the right positions, but then like an understanding of that is incredibly important as you're building your culture and building your team in a way that like, it really is like a self-reinforcing flywheel of success instead of pulling each other down. So, or fighting over the same part of the flywheel.
So what's the next horizon in the growth of a company as a technology leader? You said about the 8 or 9 technology, and that's sort of an important time for delegation and setting up processes and systems. What's the next horizon that technology leaders need to realize that they kind of need to reinvent themselves as the company gets to that next stage?
Yeah, I think people actually make too much of a jump. Like they assume 30 is like, oh my God, I'm a big company now. Like, because I think 0 to 15 is like huge, right? Like, or like 4 to 15 is like this big jump. You got to put some process in place. You got to have a bug tracking system. You got to have a design process. You got to like, there's a whole bunch of scaffolding that has to go in. But I don't think 15 to 50 is really a big deal. Like, if you have the right processes in place, you can basically just use those same ones and scale. And I think you could probably scale to like 80 or 100 in a pretty similar way without, you have to have good people. You probably have to have slightly stronger direct reports to the CTO who are comfortable managing more people and have gone through that same journey of learning. But I don't think it really breaks down. And then, the biggest next level is like, okay, when you're starting to serve majorly different markets, majorly different products or business groups, or however you define your group setup, that's like, then you're truly a portfolio manager as a CTO, and you're not a product manager. So I would say that's that inflection point that starts to change things. You're like, oh wow, you have a whole set of things that are really disparate to worry about.
Right.
And you got to think about it differently. You're sort of running many technology for many small enterprises instead of one thing.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I think we see that sort of in on the Taoist side, of course, in our portfolio, and of course on Proda. I know you guys see that quite a lot. Well, and when I work with you guys, there's a lot in that portfolio that's just so different, right? And one thing that's sort of interesting is even in large organizations, the lack of communications across different practices or lines of business or even products. Like you just said, you hit that stage and now you have a portfolio in front of you. It's like, okay, does everything work towards the same mission, right? I mean, it's like, are we designing things similarly? Is it 20 ways to do the same friggin' first thing? Like, how do we do logging, right?
Well, Saul, you've hit on something here that's like something I feel passionately about, because I think that there is like a couple things. One is like openness and transparency is the bedrock of any great culture. So if you're not willing to overshare almost across your organization, I think there's something wrong, and I never want to be part of that type of a organization. So like,
so you got your line in the sand right there.
Right. So create a layer of openness, right? Then people they talk themselves into process equals slowness. And therefore they're like, well, we're just going to create federation and then everyone go crazy and do your own thing, right? And that's a recipe for disaster. I do not think centralization and process means that you're going to be slower. So I'm a huge believer in design, like upfront design. I do not believe in agile as written in the books, because I think it's sort of like an excuse not to design upfront. And let's just keep iterating. We don't have to think about anything. And like,
you should think about some things for sure.
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in like waterfall design and iterative development. Where you're constantly learning, but try to get as close as you can to maybe it was because I was brought up on the Mythical Man Month, where it was like, fixing a bug in design phase is 1/10 of testing, which is 1/10 of production, which is, so on and so forth. So you're writing it all down is what enables you to have good centralization and one way of logging and one, because you need to have a forum to bring everybody together across these different businesses and then collaborate on a document that says, this is the way we're going to do logging. Let's create something, right? And like having that design process is what I've done at both places that I've been. And, I just believe it works. And every time someone comes in from the outside, the first reaction is, this is going to slow us down and this is terrible and the sky is falling. And then 6 months later, they go, I don't know how I ever did my work without doing this.
Exactly.
So you sort of have to see it. And
it's like that. It's like, don't clean up my office. I know where everything is. And then all of a sudden it's optimized. Like, well, why did I spite it so long? Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So last topic, let's talk more about Cresting Wave. When should people be reaching out? How can Saul and I be thinking about who to refer over? What is the ideal customer? Like where are you at?
Well, there's two sides to the community that we're building, right? First, if you're a tech leader who is as overwhelmed as ever with new innovations and you don't know what to use for a given use case and you could use some innovation scouting, there's no cost to the tech leaders. The tech leaders can join our community. They give us details about their environment, and we're going to bring them ideas based upon our best knowledge. So the more information you give us, the better our matching is going to be. So, pretty low risk for the tech leaders in the world to come.
Is there like a due diligence for you guys a little bit, so you can sort of get an insight as to how best to sell service?
We need to know, right? If we don't know anything about you, we're just going to be like everybody else, spamming you with meaningless, offers, right? We want to only bring the right type of opportunities for you, because for us to take 10 meetings and only, hit the mark once, like that's 9 times we've wasted our time too. Like we want to be efficient on both sides. So tech leaders, please, if you're willing to be transparent about your environment and you have things that you think we can be helpful in hooking you up. Our portfolio is mainly enterprise technology, cloud enablement, cybersecurity, those types of products right now. Not that we're going to be that way forever, but that's just the types of things that we're bringing. So tech leaders, that's what we need. And then on the client side, we have everything from product just come out of stealth. We're trying to get the first 5 great conversations going to learn. And then our biggest clients are probably $30 million in recurring revenue, and we're adding heft to their sales effort by bringing them to the right type of customers. So anywhere in that range of customer, we're willing to talk. And we will not just take customers though. We vet our portfolio similar to how I would vet an investment, where we want to make sure that the product has legs and is supported well and is something we want to endorse, because we're putting the Cresting Wave brand behind these companies too. And we're saying, it's good enough for us to introduce. We don't want to, we won't do that with anybody. So there's a bit of a process there, but we're psyched to meet as many as possible, because, you never know where you're going to find the next amazing innovations. And I'm a big believer in serendipity. I don't believe in optimization of this type of stuff. I think, there's a lot of great things that can come from conversations, no matter where they start.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, this has been great. Where can people follow up and learn more about you online and reach out?
Yeah. Crestingwave.com is our website. Pretty basic, but, go there and Bill at Cresting Wave, and we're psyched to engage. Would love to meet more people and build our community. So we're excited to engage.
How about you, Saul?
Just find me on LinkedIn, Saul Cates, or Google me. I got lots of blogs coming out recently around some Google stuff, actually. So maybe find me in a blog or two. Saul or Solomon Cates. See you later.
Great. Well, gentlemen, this has been super insightful, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you. All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Proto Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you in your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it would be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.